Howdy, my name is Nonat, and welcome to the Psychic Class Deep Dive for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This class is massive, and I've had to do a lot of thinking over the past month or so about whether or not I wanted to cover the Psychic in one massive 2-hour plus video or two separate, shorter videos. Judging by the length you can see on today's video, you can tell which way I went. The Psychic is just too much to cover in one single video, namely because of their subclasses. So in next week's video, I'll be going over the subclasses in heavy detail, whereas today I will just be touching on how the subclass works, as well as all their other base class features and every feat from 1 to 20. And also, sorry it just took so long for me to get this out. I know it's super late, but hopefully better late than never, right? With that said, let's go ahead and jump right into the sponsor time. Today's video is sponsored by Eldritch Osiris Games. They are a third-party publisher for Pathfinder 2nd Edition content, and today's video is specifically sponsored by their Psychics Gone Wild supplement. This is 15 plus pages of brand new material for the Psychic we're going to talk about today. This includes 2 new subconscious minds, 2 new conscious minds, as well as a load of new unique cantrips and amps for existing cantrips. If you don't know what that means, just watch more of the video, I'll explain it later. It also adds the new Primordial Conduit class archetype, allowing psychics to use elemental magics and giving even more psi cantrips and amps. EOG is proud to be a workers' co-op in the TTRPG space. Every writer, editor, designer, everybody who works for EOG has equal standing in the company and a say in the important decisions they make. They are all content creators working to give content back to the community and help their favorite game get even favoriter. Yep, that's what it says in the script they sent me, favoriter. Yeah, let's go with that. Definitely not me screwing up. If you're interested in checking out EOG and their plethora of Pathfinder 2e products, there is a link in the description, as well as a direct link to their new Psychics Gone Wild supplement. Thank you so much, Eldritch Osiris Games. That is really hard to say. Eldritch Osiris Games for sponsoring the channel. Let's talk Psychic. The Psychic is either an intelligence or charisma-based caster, depending on the subclass. They only get 6 hit points per level, so like the Wizard and Sorcerer, they are pretty squishy. Trained in Perception, Fortitude, and Reflex, and only expert in Will, they are very similar to a Wizard in a lot of these regards. They are a full-on spellcaster with no defenses. They start with Occultism and then 3 plus their Intelligence mod of skills, which if you do pick an intelligence-based subclass, means you could get upwards of 6 or 7 starting proficiencies, which ain't bad. But they do only get simple weapons and only trained in unarmored defense, no armor whatsoever, and then of course trained in spell attack rolls and DCs. Psychics use the occult spell list, but what's fascinating is they actually have a unique form of spell casting. They do not use verbal components. Any verbal component in their spell is replaced by what is called a mental component, because it's all psychic based, you see. It happens in here, not out here. This mental component is actually decided by their subclass, which again, I will be going over next week. Material components are also substituted by somatic components, so psychics basically never need any material or verbal components for their spells. It is always just going to be mental and somatic. Very cool. Otherwise, they're a pretty typical spontaneous spellcaster. They get a repertoire, they know a certain number of spells with a certain number of slots per day. Where things get interesting with the psychic is their psi cantrips and psi amps. Depending on your subclass, I know I'm going to be saying this a lot this video because the Psychic is very subclass dependent, but they're also very, very detailed. Depending on your subclass, certain cantrips will be considered Psi cantrips, and by spending a focus point, you can cast it with an amplified effect, thus Psi amp. And this is what makes the Psychic really unique. They do not have focus spells. You know, they don't have a lay on hands like a champion or an elemental toss like a sorcerer. No, they use their focus points strictly to amplify their cantrips. As such, the overall effect of these are slightly weaker usually, than existing focus spells, but that does mean they get to start with 2 focus points right at level 1. However, they still only get... No, they do get both back. They get both back? I mean, you do get both back when you refocus, meaning you can effectively use 2 amplified cantrips per encounter, which is awesome. They are our first real focus point caster. I guess you could say the same for the Oracle, because they get the same thing. But it's a cool spellcasting style. They rely much more on their cantrips than their spell slots, which I love. Now, all psychics get a very special stance, mode, whatever you want to call it. On the second round, at the earliest of combat, you can unleash your Psyche. There's a few requirements here. You are in an encounter, you cast a spell on your previous turn, and you are not stupefied. Then, as a free action at the start of your next turn, you can unleash your Psyche, basically breaking the limits on your own mental capabilities. For the next 2 turns, if you cast a damaging spell, it gains bonus damage equal to double the spell's level, and this works on cantrips. If you're level 5 and your cantrip is heightened to 3rd level automatically like it is, that means when you cast a cantrip that deals damage, it deals 6 bonus damage automatically for 2 rounds. Additionally, there are feats and abilities with the Psyche trait that can only be activated during these rounds. The downside is, after 2 rounds, not only can you not unleash Psyche again for 2 rounds, but you're also stupefied 1 for 2 rounds, which means you've got about a 25% chance of failure on any spells cast in those 2 rounds. So big risk, big reward. If you think you can end the battle in 2 turns, get that Psyche that was a good snap. Get that Psyche unleashed and wreak havoc, but beware the consequences afterwards. The subconscious mind is the first subclass the psychic picks. Because, by the way, psychics have 2 subclasses. Their subconscious mind and their conscious mind, and they're completely mix and matchable, and this is why it's getting its own video. The first choice, your subconscious mind, determines 3 things. First, your spellcasting and key ability score modifier, whether you're intelligence or charisma based, will be based on your subconscious mind. It also determines how you cast your spells, what that specific mental component is going to be, and finally, a special Psyche action that can be used after unleashing Psyche. Those are the 3 things you get from every subconscious mind. The conscious mind is where you get your fancy cantrips. Similar to a sorcerer's bloodline, your choice of conscious mind will add specific spell slot spells to your repertoire, but you will also get 3 Psi cantrips. 2 of these are going to be existing cantrips that now have a new amplified effect, and a 3rd one is going to be a completely unique cantrip only available to that psychic subclass. Additionally, as you level up, you will get 2 more unique cantrips only available to that subclass, meaning every single subclass gets 3 unique brand new cantrips, each with amplifiable effects, as well as 2 augmented existing cantrips, also with amplifiable effects. This is why it's getting its own video. Since they're a spellcaster, they don't start getting feats until 2nd level, at which point they also get skill feats, general feats, signature spells, skill increases. I've done this how many times now? Okay. I know this art is awesome, and it's like really cool to see them like crushing a robot with their mind, but all I can think of, and please tell me in the comments if you've seen this before, but there's a Kids in the Hall sketch where there's just like a nerd on a cliff looking at a party and he just goes, I crush you, I crush you, crush you, I crush you. Oh, look at your head, I crush you, crush your head. That's all I can think of. And now I want to play a psychic that does that. Crush you. Ability boosts, ancestry feats, and then at 5th level, psychics get a 3rd focus point, and auto-refocus back up to 3 focus points. Reflex also increases to Expert at level 5, and then at level 7, they get Expert Spellcasting, Expert DCs. 9th level is Expert Fortitude, just a lot of Expert proficiencies. And then 11th level is pretty nice. Perception increases to expert, will saves increase to master, auto crit succeeding, normal successes, and they get expert proficiency with weapons. It's fine. Oh, and the expert train don't stop there, because level 13 is expert in unarmored defense, and then weapon specialization for a bit of extra damage. Honestly, this is very par for the course for spellcasters. All of their special abilities are usually in their class base feature, and then there are, of course, spells themselves. The spy level class features are usually only super exciting for martial classes. Level 15 is Master Spellcasting, level 17 is Legendary Will Saves that you can no longer crit fail, and Infinite Mind is 1 10th level spell slot per day, again, very par for the course. Level 19 is also Legendary Spellcasting. Let's go talk about feats! Ancestral Mind is awesome. It allows you to take any spell gained by an ancestry feat and cast it using your spellcasting modifier, whether it's charisma or intelligence, and consider it an occult spell with your psychic mental spellcasting components. Lots of really cool benefits here, because usually if you get an ancestry feat, it is stuck to charisma as your spellcasting modifier. This is not that useful if you're already a charisma-based psychic, but if you're an intelligence-based psychic, you could get some great use out of this. Counter Thought is a situational counterspell. In those situations, it's more flexible than Counterspell, but it's only useful in those situations. As a reaction, if a creature is casting a spell with the mental trait, then you, as a reaction, can expend a spell slot to counter that spell. The reason this is nice and versatile is you don't need to have the spell they're casting. Normally in Pathfinder 2e, if someone casts, say, Fear, you need to know how to cast Fear to counteract it. With Counter Thought, even if you don't know Fear, you do know that Fear has the mental trait, and so you can just sacrifice any spell slot because you're a psychic and counter it even if it's not on your spell list. So it's situational because it's only mental effects, but it allows you to counteract every mental spell in the game even if you don't know them. Mental Buffer is far less exciting. You gain resistance to mental damage equal to half your level, increased to your full level when you unleash your Psyche, but mental damage is not super common in Pathfinder 2e, at least not in the low levels, which is where most campaigns take place. I don't know if I've ever encountered mental damage outside of like the Daze cantrip. I guess mental damage is a lot more common for player characters to use rather than enemies to use against them, so I feel like Mental Buffer, while it's just free damage reduction, it's not going to come up all that often. Psychic Rapport is okay. After you cast a spell, you gain a +1 to all of your social skills of Diplomacy, Deception, and Intimidation, as well as Sense Motive with Perception, which is a cool little bonus, until the start of your next turn. This is fine. I guess it allows you to cast a spell and then follow it up with an Intimidate or a Feint. I don't know why you would do that after. More often than not, this is going to be useful in role-playing social situations. The hard part is that they're already going to know you cast a spell, which might negate any penalty you would get anyway because they might not trust you. You'd have to be clever. I'm not saying it's a useless feat, I just think you need to have a little bit bigger brain than me to make good use of it. Cantrip Expansion. Yay! Mental Balm is an example of a feat that is also an amp. When you amp a cantrip in this way, you can replace the cantrip's normal amped effect with Mental Balm's effect. Let's say you amplify Telekinetic Projectile. Well, after casting it, you or one ally within 30 feet get a +2 status bonus against will saves against emotion effects, very specific, but it lasts for an entire minute. Additionally, you get to counteract a frightened effect on the target of yourself or your ally. Pretty good. You can even use this on Stupefied, which could be a nice way to get around the Stupefied effect of Unleash Psyche. The downside is, to succeed this, you would need to pass the Stupefied effect to not fizzle the spell, and then succeed the counteract effect against yourself, and then it would only have one round afterwards anyway, so it's a little situational, but it's a nice way to throw a rock at somebody and then just say, I'm not afraid anymore! Cyburst is great. It's very limited because it has the Psyche trait, so remember, it only functions when you have unleashed your Psyche. But once per round, for one action, you deal 1d4 bludgeoning damage within 30 feet. This scales like a cantrip. This is a 1-action D4 scaling cantrip. But again, it's only available once you have unleashed Psyche. It's great. If you're level 3, that's 2d4 extra damage you wouldn't get to do twice over the 2 turns your Psyche is unleashed. It's just good. It doesn't cost a resource. It's 1 action 30-foot range. That's nuts. Warp Space is a really cool amp. In place of the cantrip's normal amplified effect, you pick a space within 30 feet of you, and the spell is cast from there. This can also increase its total range from you. What does this mean? Let's say you cast Produce Flame with a normal range of 30 feet, but you pick Warp Space as you amplify it, and pick a space 30 feet ahead of you. Well, now Produce Flame has a 30-foot range from that spot. You've effectively doubled the range of Produce Flame. Or you're around a corner. You pick a place past the corner and then shoot Produce Flame horizontally from there, meaning you have literally shot Produce Flame around a corner. Awesome. Oh, and you can also use this to get behind cover by choosing the warp space behind the target's cover. If they're behind a barricade and you just choose to shoot it from behind them, their cover doesn't count. Astral Tether is okay. I don't actually know how great it is because I don't know all the amped cantrip effects by heart, but for 1 action, you pick a creature within 60 feet and mentally connect yourself to it. What's nice is that this tether does not break unless you go beyond 60 feet from each other. So you can do this in the morning and then just chill out next to each other all day. What this allows you to do is that if you use an amped cantrip effect that would only affect you, you can instead use it on that ally instead. Again, I don't know all the amped cantrip effects by heart, so I don't know if there's any super good ones you could put like on your fighter or something, but overall, if there's any good self-buffing effects, you can put those on an ally so long as you remain within 60 feet of each other. Pretty cool. Homing Beacon is another alternate amp effect for cantrips that have to hit a target. If the spell lands a spell attack roll or the creature at least fails their saving throw against it, they are basically tracked for 1 minute. If they would ever be invisible, they are instead concealed, or if it would be concealed, it is completely visible. Really, really solid, just a good way to track someone. If someone's getting away, you can just lock that tracking chip into your Ray of Frost and blast them, and then keep following them for that minute, and if they hide behind a tree or something, you can still see them. Some cool utility, you know? Psi Strikes is the Psychic's version of Bespell Weapon. As a free action, if you cast a spell or you unleash your Psyche, then your weapon and unarmed strikes start dealing an extra 1d6 force damage. You're not going to be attacking as a psychic. For dual class variant, this could be fun. If you're playing like a fighter psychic and you unleash your Psyche, then you can start dealing the extra force damage. That could be a ton of fun in the dual class variant specifically, but by base rules, Psi Strikes is just not going to be that useful. Thought Form Summoning is awesome. If you cast a spell that summons a creature, rather than summoning a physical manifestation of that creature, you summon an almost ethereal mental projection of that creature. This gives it resistance to physical damage, but in exchange, weakness to mental and force damage. This is awesome. It can also move through enemies without tumbling through or anything. Basically, you are summoning a projection of a creature. It still deals normal damage. I think it would be kind of cool if it dealt force or mental damage instead, but still gaining the resistance to physical damage equal to half its level is cool. Now, the problem is that sentence there. Resistance to physical damage equal to half its level, not yours. You get this feat at level 4, meaning you can cast Summon Blank level 2, which means you're summoning a level 1 creature. Because this doesn't say parentheses minimum 1, at level 4, this feat does nothing. This feat lets you summon a level 1 creature, and it gains no resistance to physical damage, because half of 1 rounded down is 0. But don't worry, because it still gets the full weakness to mental damage. It does still get the ability to move through enemies, so it can make flanking a little easier. Overall, this gets a bit better at higher levels, but summoned abilities always trail behind you in level. For example, if you are casting this at 5th level, it's only going to be a level 5 creature, which means if you are level 9, your summoned creature gets 2 resistance to physical damage. So I think this could be a little stronger. I wish it was half of your level, not half of its level. It's still a cool idea, like just the flavor of summoning a psychic image of a creature is super awesome, but I'm not a fan of that sentence the way it's worded. Speaking of super awesome, Violent Unleash. When you unleash your Psyche at the start of your turn, as a free action, you can make your brain explode. This deals 2d6 force damage to all creatures in a 20-foot emanation, so watch out for your party members, and it makes you stunned 1. Now, what's debatable about this is whether or not it affects your actions that turn or next turn. When we looked at this in my live stream, I think we determined it affects next turn, because your turn starts. You get your actions at the start of your turn, then you free action Unleash Psyche, then you free action Violent Unleash. You already got your actions that turn, and Stunned reduces the actions you get at the start of your turn. Well, the start of your turn already passed, so you already get 3 actions this turn. So you Violent Unleash, you get your 3 actions, and then next turn, you only get 2 actions because of Stunned. I believe that's the way it works. If you interpret it differently, I would love to hear your argument down in the comments. This is one that has been debated. I don't know if it's been clarified by Paizo or not. Inertial Barrier at 6th level honestly ain't bad. You amp up the cantrip and, instead of its usual effects, you gain resistance to all physical damage equal to 2 plus the spell's level. You're casting this at character level 6, so the spell's level is already heightened to 3rd. So you're just giving yourself 5 resistance to physical damage for a full round? Not terrible. This is level 6 though, so if you're getting hit by a creature, you're probably taking 20 to 30 plus damage, so I don't know how much 5 is gonna matter, but it's a cool little option to have in place. Parallel Breakthrough is honestly awesome. You pick a subclass other than your own, and you gain one of the 3 Psi Cantrips associated with that subclass, plus the ability to amplify it. If you didn't pick the subclass that gives you Telekinetic Projectile, well, you can now take that as a Psi Cantrip and amplifying it as though you were that subclass. Pretty cool. Sixth Sense is fine. It's one of those GM rolls perception for you abilities, except this one is specifically for haunts and spirits and other ethereal beings. The best part of this is probably that you do get a chance to detect creatures inhabiting physical objects. For example, if a spirit is possessing a bust of a mansion owner, then you could actually detect the spirit within the bust. As is the problem with all feats like this, it's only as good as your GM. If your GM forgets to roll it for you, then the feat might as well not exist. Steady spellcasting. As usual, I don't like it. I don't like a 25% chance to sustain a spell if it would be interrupted. Interruptions are already rare enough, and the fact that it's only 1 in 4 times going to be successful, not worth a feat slot. Strain Mind is awesome, and I want to see more sacrifice resources for this, if that makes sense. Let me explain. As a free action, once per hour, if you have no focus points, you can amplify a Psi Cantrip. Now, obviously, you don't have any focus points, so instead, you sacrifice hit points equal to the spell's level. Sorry, 4 times the spell's level. So at level 6, if you're casting a 3rd level focus spell effectively, you're losing 12 hit points to cast it. I think that is rad. I think that's super cool, and I want more abilities to sacrifice something to do something that you're out of resources for. You know, if a wizard is out of spell slots, maybe they can inflict drained or exhaustion on themselves in order to keep casting. I love stuff that lets you sacrifice something else in place of a static resource, and Strain Mind is just super cool. I understand it being once per hour though, otherwise I bet there'd be some insane just amplify forever that would never stop. Now on the other foot, at 8th level, if you're out of focus points, you can always use Brain Drain. For 2 actions, they make a will save against your spell DC, not your class DC. This is already awesome. And if they fail, not only are they stupefied 1 for a minute, but you get a focus point back. The downside here is that you can only use this once per day. The minute something fails, you can't use Brain Drain again. What's nice is if they succeed, you can try again, but at most you're gonna get 1 focus point back per day. It's alright. I think I prefer sacrificing hit points for an extra focus spell rather than Brain Drain. Dark Persona's Presence is another Unleash Psyche buff. As a free action, when you unleash your Psyche, everything in a 30-foot emanation must make a will save against your spell DC. What I love about this is that includes your allies. This is so dark and foreboding, your allies are afraid of you. This is like the Fear spell, Frightened 1 on a success, Frightened 2 on a failure, and 3 on a crit failure. Additionally, this emanation lasts as long as your Psyche is unleashed. Anything that enters your aura for the first time makes that will save, and if they are in your aura, their frightened condition does not reduce below 1. There is a detrimental, quote-unquote, side effect of this. While your dark persona is in effect, you crave only destruction and entropy. You can only cast spells that directly damage something or impose a negative condition. You can't heal, you can't do much utility outside of negative debuffs. All you can do is go on the offensive, and I think that's awesome. Mental Static is a damaging reaction on a spellcaster. What game are we playing? As a reaction, if you critically succeed a will save against a mental effect, that creature takes mental damage equal to your level. That's 8 damage back on a critical success, which by level 8, they either already have or almost have master will saves, which auto crit succeed if you roll a normal success. That is really, consistent quote-unquote retaliation damage if you're facing something that's using mental spells. If you crit save against Fear, they take damage. That's awesome. Remove Presence is so cool. You amplify a cantrip, and if it hits the target or they fail their saving throw against it, you vanish from their sight. Not just invisible, you are undetected by them. For 1 minute, they don't even know you are there anymore. You vanish from their sight, their smell, their hearing, and their thoughts until you take a hostile action or 1 minute goes by. If you're being chased by a guard or a guard spots you as you're sneaking in, you can throw a rock at them with telekinetic projectile and then amplify it to vanish. He will forget you were there. I guess he won't forget you were there, but he won't know you're there anymore. It functions like invisibility, and it says one of the only ways to see through it is true sight. Thought sense is interesting. You gain an imprecise sense with a 30-foot range that can let you know if something is thinking. This is similar to like tremor sense or something like the Psychopomp's undead sense. If you are approaching a corner, you can't hear their thoughts, but you can tell that a creature is thinking around the corner. That's a really cool little bonus sense, and I love that. A little specific, but a cool little bonus is when you unleash Psyche, you can actively seek with this sense, meaning rather than just knowing there is something around the corner, you could roll perception, and if you roll high enough, you could know where they are around that corner. Pretty cool. Whispering Steps can amplify any cantrip that costs 2 or more actions to cast and targets 1 or more creatures with a spell attack roll or saving throw. If it hits or they fail their save, you get to force that creature to step in a direction of your choice as forced movement. The only problem, and I really don't agree with this is sort of a consistent design thing for Pathfinder 2e, you can't force the target to step into any hazardous situation. You can't step them off a cliff, you can't step them into fire, you can't step them into a ranger's snare, you can just step them towards the fighter or away from the wizard. It's cool, don't get me wrong, but it's just so unfortunate and limiting that you can't do some really creative stuff with this. I think it's to limit players and protect GMs, because GMs for decades have been complaining, I had this big bad boss, but then they used control and made it walk off the edge. And I'm like, but that's a good story. It's a really cool story that they killed your BBEG with charm. Level 10, we're getting into some feats for specific subclasses. I'm going to be skipping most of these level 10 feats and saving them for the next video because they are specific to the 4 subconscious mind subclasses, so we'll go over those next time. But what's also at level 10 is Signature Spell Expansion, which is 2 additional signature spells, which is kind of nuts and really powerful for a spontaneous caster. I think that's way better than Cantrip Expansion. Foreseen Failure is weird. As a free action, once per day, if you critically fail all spell attack rolls with a spell, or all targets critically succeed their saving throw, this will probably be most useful on single target spells, you can, as a free action, cast something else. It has to take the same number of actions or fewer, but if you cast 2 action, I don't know the occult spell list. If you cast 2 action blindness and they critically succeed and nothing happens, then as a free action, you get to say, actually no, I cast Chromatic Ray instead, and cast that. This is super cool. You do end up spending 2 spell slots, but it's amazing getting your do-over right then and there, instead of just having to shrug and go, I guess I end my turn. Because that feels horrible as a spellcaster, so getting that do-over once per day is awesome. The spellcast does need to be different, though. You can't fail blindness and then cast blindness again. This next feat is called and it is okay. As a reaction, if an ally that is not a minion, so summoned creatures don't count, if an ally goes down to 0 hit points within 60 feet of you, as a reaction, you can unleash your Psyche. And it only stays unleashed until the end of your next turn, at which point you suffer the consequences of your Psyche returning to normal, which is stupefied. Where this is mostly useful is if your Psyche is already unleashed, you can then instantly use any Psyche action that costs 1 action or less. I don't know any off the top of my head, I'm sure there's some good ones. Overall, this is not great. Sure, it lets you unleash your Psyche as a reaction, but you only get it for 1 turn instead of 2. Additionally, if your Psyche had recently worn off and you're currently still stupefied or in the 2-round cooldown phase, No is not able to be used because you're still in that cooldown. You can't unleash your Psyche, and No does not get around that. Overall, kinda lackluster. Psi Catastrophe is worded very strangely. It's a Psyche action, so you can only use it after unleashing your Psyche, but for 2 actions, you deal damage to everything in 20-foot emanation around you. The damage is worded very strange, though. It is 1d6 bludgeoning damage per level. I've never seen something worded like this in Pathfinder. Usually, if it's like the Inventor's Explode action, it's like 1d6 damage. This damage increases by 1d6 at 3rd, 5th, and so on. This one just says 1d6 bludgeoning damage per level. Does this mean 12d6 damage? Is this 12d6 damage for 2 actions? That's kinda good. And it goes up by 1d6 every time you level up? Because it's not a spell, so it's gotta be. That's the only way I can interpret it. It also ends your Psyche instantly, but if you're using this on your 2nd turn of Unleash Psyche anyway, you might as well. It's basically a full-on spell. That's the same damage as a fireball. This is a quote-unquote free fireball. It doesn't take a spell slot. That's not bad. It's 20-foot emanation around you. You basically are the burst. It's great. Honestly, it's fantastic as long as it is your level and not half. Conscious Spell Specialization I think is too little too late. You gain an extra 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th level spell slot. That's 4 extra spells per day. But you're already level 14. You've already got 5th, 6th, and 7th level spells. Chances are you're not using those spells that many times per day. I think at this point you still have 3 slots of each level. Is a 4th really going to make that big of a difference? And at 18th level you also get a 5th level spell slot. They're even restricted to only the spells granted by your subclass. I just don't think this is that useful. If you got this at like level 4 and it gave you a 1st level slot, and then as you level up it gives you more slots sort of retroactively, that'd be better. If this is a feat that you got early and scaled with you, it'd be fine. The fact that it's at level 14 and it gives you those low slots just isn't worth it. Deep Roots is also kinda meh. If you ever use a mental effect spell on a creature and they critically fail, then at the end of that spell's effect, you can choose to have them take 1d6 damage per level of the effect. If you hit someone, like it says, with a command spell and you upcast it to 7th level, then after command wears off, they take 7d6 damage. It's fine. What's cool is it does work if the spell is dispelled. If someone counteracts it or gets rid of it, you can still initiate the damage. I just don't see when this would be all that useful. I guess it's free. It's free, it doesn't cost a resource, it's just bonus damage. The problem is that it relies on critically failing. This is only going to be useful on lower leveled enemies, but if you're fighting a bunch of level 12 creatures and you're a level 14 psychic, it could be worth it to command or control one and then have them take the damage after it wears off. I don't know, it seems a little situational. Shatter Space, another amp. This is actually a super awesome amp. Either you or the target of your spell gains an aura of torn space, dealing 1d6 damage per level of the spell. Since you amped a cantrip, you're level 14, that's 7d6 damage to everything in the aura on a basic reflex save. Additionally, a critical fail not only doubles the damage, but knocks them prone, and the best part, you can choose whether or not the target of the aura is affected. What this means is if you see 5 enemies all clumped together in a 20-foot area, you can throw a rock. I don't know why telekinetic projectile is just the one I go for. It's just easy. You can throw a rock at the one in the middle, hit them, amp it, which I should say you have to amp it before you throw it, but you amp it, you throw it, it hits them, and all of a sudden they're all ripped asunder by shattered space, including the one you hit. That could be a free 35d6 damage right there for a focus point. That's huge. Constant levitation. You are permanently affected by the fly spell, and after unleashing your Psyche, you get a 10-foot speed bonus. Pretty cool. Just infinite flight, pretty standard for level 16. Target of Psychic Ire overall is just funny to me. If you hit them with the spell, they become the subject of random telekinetic phenomenon. At the beginning of each of their turns, they are just struck with random crap around them, whether it's rocks, broken pieces of wood, anything. They take 1d4 bludgeoning damage per level of the cantrip that was amped. You're level 16. That's 8d4 damage at the start of each of their turns. It is a basic reflex save, but hopefully that's a potential 24d4 damage just passively for a focus point. I know at the beginning of this video I said that focus points for psychics are a little bit worse than existing ones. I'm not sure that's true anymore. They might be the best focus points in the game, but that's why they're made to use them. Wandering Thoughts is fine. Once per round as a free action, if you have just cast a spell, you can teleport 15 feet. What's nice, this can be a cantrip. This allows you to throw a rock at somebody and teleport 15 feet. Is it massive? No, but it's free. That is free movement, and it doesn't trigger opportunities or reactions. It's teleportation. So unless the somatic component of your spell triggered it, and you're 15 feet away from them. Amazing. At level 18, the Psychic finally gets a really good defensive feat. As a reaction, you can use All in Your Head. If you're making a fortitude or reflex save, you can roll will instead. The only downside here is you don't get to auto crit succeed or become immune to crit fail because it's a will save. It's still technically a fortitude or reflex save, you're just using your will modifier. But that's going to be so much higher. Even if your ability scores are the same, it's going to be +4 higher just from proficiency. And because you're going to be using, well, maybe you won't be using wisdom, but still, proficiency-wise, that's almost always going to be worth it. And now the feat that everybody talks about, Cranial Detonation. As a free action, once per round, if you reduce a non-mindless enemy to 0 hit points with a spell, boom. All creatures within a 15-foot emanation of that creature take 10d6 bludgeoning damage. If this damage kills another creature, their head also explodes. Sadly, the damage cannot stack on multiple creatures. If a creature takes damage from the first explosion, they will not take damage from the second one. For a level 18 feat, I think it would have been fine to have a chain reaction. It would be awesome to see 30 goblins and just Cranial Detonation 1, and then they just start going off like cherry bombs. It was just such a cool idea. I just wish that I guess it could technically still happen. One blows up into a chain reaction which like moves through the crowd, but that really only works if you're going to one-shot kill them all, which you're level 18. Chances are the enemies you're fighting don't have 30 hit points. Deepest Wellspring is really specific, and most psychics are not going to bother with this. Alright, we got 4 big level 20 feats, starting with Become Thought. You become Thought, gaining resistance 10 to physical damage, weakness 5 to mental, and weakness 10 to anything that damages the spirit directly. I'm not a fan of this. Now, it is permanent, so I guess resistance 10 permanent is good, but you're level 20. You're going to be taking 80 plus damage per hit. I will say, casting Disguise Self for a single action at will is pretty fantastic, and it's permanent. You can just change yourself as many times as you like. I think it's still an illusion effect, so things can see through it, but it's cool. And the big one, once per year, if you die, as long as a single person can remember you, you are reborn through their memories once per year. It is a cheat death. This is an I don't want to lose my character feat. So, quick side tangent, because this video is not long enough already. I'm not a fan of these feats that let you come back at level 20. Chances are, if you're level 20, you're fighting something that's going to destroy the world. If you lose, the world is probably going boom. So even if you come back, if the rest of your party doesn't come back, you probably are still going boom with the rest of the world. Mind over Matter, a second 10th level spell slot per day. Twin Psyche. This should have been a class feature. Instead of unleashing your Psyche for 2 rounds, you unleash it for 4. This should have been something that, like, at level 7, it lasts 3 rounds instead of 2, and then at level 15, it lasts 4 rounds instead of 3. It should have just scaled with your level as a psychic. This should not be a feat. And Unlimited Potential. I believe the Sorcerer gets this as well. Once per minute for 1 action meta magic. I think this is the only psychic meta magic feat. If your next action is to cast a spell of 5th level or lower, it does not use a spell slot. Basically, infinite soothe for infinite healing once per minute. That's the typical use for it. You might be able to get something cool out of it, especially if you've got utility spells of 5th level or lower. I guess I'd take this over that one feat that gives you bonus spell slots of 4th and lower. This is just infinite spells versus 1 more of each per day. Sure, that's level 14, but regardless. And that's the Psychic! Part 1. Time to get to work on the subclasses and those 4 feats I skipped next week. And I mean it next week. I'm not talking 2 months from now. It's gonna be next week. Thank you so much for watching. I want to give a huge shout out to my patrons for supporting me in everything I do. You guys are the best and you keep me going. Speaking of keeping me going, shout out to Eldritch Osiris Games for sponsoring today's video. Once again, click the link in the description to check out their Psychics Gone Wild supplement for even more psychic goodness. That is all from me. I hope you all take care of yourselves. I'm gonna go lament the fact that I have another hour-long video to make after I finish this one. Bye-bye. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Oh, and until next time, no net ones.